Welcome back to the Swamp247 Podcast. I'm Thomas Goldkamp here with Blake Alderman. We're your staff writers for Swamp247.com. Blake, I guess, there's not a ton of recruiting news. I know we'll get to a little bit in the second half, but we were trying to kind of figure out what to talk about on the show today. And I guess kind of the news of the day is the Florida basketball team still. I touched a little bit on the YouTube channel last week, just some of the different comings and goings from the program. Florida obviously has 4 transfers out of the program in Noah Locke, Omar Payne, Osai Osifo, and Wes Glover. And then the newest news that we have is that Scotty Lewis will in fact enter the NBA draft. He's actually signing with an agent, so it's not one of those deals where he's going to be able to return. So all in all, you're looking at 6 transfers from the Florida basketball team on the way out. Sorry, not 6 transfers, but 6 departures. And I think at this point, Blake, it's pretty clear that Mike White's got some roster rebuilding to do.
Absolutely, and I think you're seeing that through the NCAA transfer portal with the 2 additions that they've added in Brandon McKissick and CJ Felder. McKissick being, I believe he's a grad transfer, if I'm not mistaken. He was pretty coveted. Florida is they have other guys that we can get into later that they're even more active with through the transfer portal. It's crazy, man. I mean, Mike White and Dan Mullen are like the chief and staffs of the transfer portal for sure.
Yeah, they've been pretty successful, obviously, and I think Mike White, he's been a pretty good recruiter. Now you can debate whether or not they've really recruited to a proper system or had enough of an identity in recruiting, but actually going out and taking care of the salesman part of things, that's something that Mike White really excels at. And whatever he's telling these guys, it's working. And Florida had a lot of success with Colin Castleton coming in this year, a guy that I think probably wasn't really that highly thought of in the transfer portal, but was a guy that Mike White had recruited as a high school player, so there was some pre-existing relationship. But you talk about these 2 new guys. I mean, Brandon McKissick's a guy that 17.2 points per game, kind of an elite scorer, can kind of do it all, shoots the lights out from beyond the arc, so definitely a big addition. I think the question for me, and I've talked about this a bit, how are they going to piece it all together? Because when you're talking about building a roster, Florida has at least probably 3 openings, I think, depending on, Colin Castleton has his name in the draft, but, probably comes back. Florida's really going to be relying almost on, not just 1 or 2 transfers like a Castleton or a KJ Blackshear. At this point, you're talking about Florida's probably going to have a starting lineup that's made up of at least 3 transfers when you look at what's coming back. So I think, when you go and land these high-profile guys, these guys that are maybe coming from slightly smaller programs like UMKC for McKissick, how do they go from being kind of the big fish in that pond to now all of a sudden you're just one piece in a roster that's really going to be made up of probably, we would think, a couple of these more elite types. CJ Felder's a guy that had 9.7 points per game, 5.9 rebounds per game. You're talking about the potential for, I think, a lot of chemistry issues to work through, I think, in terms of ego and that kind of thing. So it'll be interesting to see how they put it together, Blake. I think I've said this in the past, I think, given the 6 years of work that we've seen from Mike White and kind of the consistency of the issues, it's hard for me to be too excited about these transfers. Obviously they're big name guys, they're coveted players, but until we see them kind of put it together in a cohesive, unit, it's hard for me to get excited.
And I think that's just the lay of the land with the basketball team in general. Even if there wasn't those 6 departures for the team, I still think that there just wouldn't be a ton of excitement around the program. I think if you wanted to find a silver lining, having some new faces and kind of the unknown of, being on the positive side of things, because like you said, a guy like McKissick, who was pretty coveted, was a big fish in that small pond. Will the wheels turn at the same level at a bigger, an even bigger pond like Florida in the SEC, and a chance to where you're not a team that's trying to make the NCAA tournament, but trying to continue to get past that second round of 32 or even farther through the program. So I think that that intrigue of some of these guys and will they mesh together through the season, I think is maybe a little bit more on the positive side than, if those guys didn't leave, just because I think no matter how you look at it, I just don't think there's going to be a ton of excitement around the basketball team in general.
No, I think, and that's a good point. You bring in a guy like Kawasi Reeves. He's obviously a very, very talented player. Right. But yeah, I mean, fans don't really, I think you go into next season, I hate to say it, but it's almost a here we go again mentality going in. And really the challenge for Mike White and the Florida basketball team is to somehow flip the narrative. And I think the only way you do that right at this point, going into year 7 is you win and you win big. So Florida's got more work to do in the transfer portal. I know, we've written about a couple of the guys that they've been in contact with forward Noah Gurley from Furman is one guy that Florida is in the final 8 for. He'll make a decision this week. He's expected to talk to all 8 of his finalists at some point this week on Zoom calls before making that decision. He's another guy that gives you a lot of versatility. He's a 6'8 forward, 15.4 points per game, 5.8 rebounds, can stretch it out to the 3-point line where he's a 34% shooter. So, Florida's got some options. I think you're going to see a roster that athletically can definitely get it done. I continue to harp on what does it look like from an identity standpoint. And, when you're bringing in transfers, not only are they trying to get used to the coaches and the new system, but really you do not have as much of a background in what your team's going to look like. When you bring in 3 to 4 year players and you've seen them as a freshman, a sophomore, you kind of know their strengths and weaknesses. Right. Mike White's really going to have to adjust on the fly as they get these transfers in, and he figures out really what they can and can't do.
And that just doesn't sound like that's an ideal situation at all. I mean, when you said that inside, I'm kind of like, ugh.
Yeah. It's but it'll be interesting. I don't really want to talk about basketball too much. I feel like we've kind of killed the topic to death over the last little bit, and we'll certainly talk about it more as Florida kind of finishes out the roster. But Blake, one thing that'll be interesting to watch tonight is Andrew Nembhard will be playing in the national title game. So some of these guys ended up having some success.
Yeah, I think we were talking about it even before we shot. I mean, for the most part, you can give credit to Mike White on the one thing is that, those guys that do leave the program, I don't think very many of them had this ton of success. There was obviously Nembhard, who's playing in the title game for Gonzaga. A great team. They have a chance to go defeat the whole season undefeated. And Texas Tech was the other one. The name's escaping me. So there's not a lot of names out there that that if they transferred that they didn't go out and have this buku kind of success there. So I think a lot of Florida fans, it's always, a Florida forever type thing. I'm sure they're pulling for an Andrew Nembhard. I'm certainly pulling for Gonzaga just because, the chance to see a team go wire to wire undefeated, that's always something special. So I'm definitely pulling for him.
Well, and the other thing about that is, you look at some of the guys that are transferring, apart from Noah Locke, none of them are real, ace contributors. Osai Osifo, a couple minutes here and there, but you never really saw upside past that, I don't think, in his 1 year at Florida. Quez Glover, a little bit of a turnover machine, probably just doesn't have the skills for the SEC level, unfortunately. And so some of that roster attrition is natural, and it's something that it's not unique to Florida. There's a lot of teams out there having a lot of transfers. I just think, the issue is a lot of teams that have a lot of these transfers still have a set identity that they're kind of building towards, and I'm not sure I see that from Florida.
No, Blake, I don't either.
Let's shift gears a little bit. I wanted to get your thoughts on Pro Day. I know I've talked about it a little bit. But I guess first off, just off the cuff, was there anything that really jumped out at you?
I obviously, Kyle Pitts comes out and he has, the workout he had. I think everyone expected that from him. It kind of backs up, uber athletic, has the production. He submitted himself as, easily, a top 5 at the, the least to me, that seems like that's, kind of the bottom line for him. So continued to kind of do what he did. I think it's interesting to see Kadarius Toney continue to rise up, the draft boards, if you will, pulling out that 4.41, that 4.39. That's the speed you see, you expect to see from him. On the field, you see him leaving guys, that clip in that South Carolina game when there's just all these players around him and he just jets through them. You can do so many different things with him. I think his broad jump was probably the most impressive number that I think I saw from him, just throughout the entire thing. But a guy like Trevon Grimes, 6'4", 220 pounds and pulling out, a 4.51 and a 4.49, that's a big body receiver that can move. When you look at those types of receivers in the NFL, it's turning into more of a passing league, continues to turn more and more into a passing league with just how you scheme around guys and how athletic guys are now in the game. But a guy that big that can move, I heard a comparison and he even said that he kind of compares himself to Chase Claypool. I thought that was a really good comparison there. I thought he had a really impressive workout there. I think he's kind of the forgotten guy, a former 5-star player. Everyone, coming out of high school, he was a dude, and you see him go through the transfer portal. You've got all these guys, the Van Jeffersons, you've got Kyle Pitts, you've got all these weapons that Florida's offense had around. And, and he's kind of the forgotten guy. Obviously he was productive enough. I'm not saying that, he was completely forgotten. But when you see those numbers there, those really jumped out to me, a guy that big that can move like that. And obviously, seeing Daryl Slayton, pulling out a 40 time that was, pretty close to Kyle Trask. I think a big guy like that at 330 pounds was impressive to see him move like that. Because, this was a guy that coming out of high school, some people were looking at him as an offensive guard, you know what I mean? And those guys aren't really known for being blazers. So, that basketball background that he had too coming out of high school, I thought was impressive. Marco Wilson with that vertical jump. He was jumping out the gym in there. So, that was impressive too. He was just a really athletic guy. And I think that he did struggle, quite a bit. He had that up and down career, but whenever you see those numbers like that, I think that's going to perk up the, some of those NFL scouts. They look up and they're like, wait, what did he do? So,
absolutely.
That was impressive as well.
Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely.
And I'm glad you mentioned
those were the really ones that jumped out to me.
I'm glad that you mentioned Grimes because in the video I did talking about, pro day and kind of my thoughts on it, I somehow completely forgot Trey Grimes. I think he's a guy that's really going to impress in an interview setting too. Very, very personable guy. I think, like you said, I think when you talk about that kind of frame and really pretty good speed,
right.
Who knows how quote unquote official those times are, but relative.
If they're close, even if they're close, that's still impressive.
It's really impressive. So, and he's a guy that I think to me is kind of just scratching the surface of his potential. I think like you said, Florida had a lot of other weapons. And so in terms of actual game reps, we didn't see a ton of what Trayvon Grimes could do other than last year. And, last year his numbers were really, really good. He was right up there in terms of, touchdown catches with both Kyle.
I think he was fifth in the SEC, I think, so without looking.
Very, very productive player. And I don't know, I guess, Blake, was there anything that stood out to you in a negative way?
In a negative way, I'm trying to think. Pro day is pretty cut and paste.
Yeah.
Kind of looking at Kyle Trask there, he seems to be falling down some of these draft boards. And I think whenever you look at a guy like that, he's really accurate with the football. You see some of the other guys in there, I just don't know what he could do. I guess if you just kind of the lack of, even I saw a story that you wrote on Swamp247 about how his teammates are stunned of, the lack of draft buzz that he's getting in general. So I think, in a negative way, I don't know that he did anything to really continue to rise himself up those draft boards. I don't think he had a bad, I don't think he had a bad workout. I think
it was just kind of what you would expect.
It was what you would expect, and I think whenever you see guys like Justin Fields, the quarterback from BYU, Zach Wilson, when you see those kind of workouts and what those guys are doing, those are some wow workouts. So I don't think that he quite put that up there, but I think I read a story too that, the Saints were looking at Kyle Trask as, kind of that replacement. Oh, I bet you would. Yeah. As a Saints fan, I would not like that as a Bucs fan. That would crush my soul. But I think whenever you see that fit, I think that would be a really good one for Kyle Trask because I think he did a lot of good things. He'd have a weapon, plenty of weapons around him too. But I think I don't think that he did enough to continue to rise up any of these draft boards. I think he's a great player. I think when you look at what he did there, I think he does a ton of things great, but I just don't know that he really had that wow workout that's going to just, get him the buzz that he's just not getting.
No, I think that's the right way to pretty much explain it. I talked about with Kyle Pitts, his pro day really could only invite downside because, you're expecting him to turn in those really, really impressive numbers. And, he went out and did it. So he didn't, he kind of cut off that downside. Whereas, with Kyle Trask, I thought maybe a little bit on the flip side, had he shown up and run, say, a 4.8 or a 4.7 or something to where you're like, oh, really? Like maybe he is more mobile than we thought. Then maybe he could have elevated. But I think, like we said, it was kind of what we expected from him. And I think the biggest thing for Kyle Trask going forward, he's just got to find, like you said, an NFL team that kind of fits him from a system standpoint. And I think you look at what Drew Brees did. Drew Brees was never a super mobile guy. Wasn't even a tall quarterback. Kyle Trask at least can see over his line. And like we said, he moves really well in the pocket. And so I think if you can get him in an offense like that, where you've got a weapon like an Alvin Kamara to kind of slow defenses down, get them on their heels a little bit so they can't just fully pin their ears back, I think Kyle Trask's the guy that's going to have a terrific NFL career. And even if he's not elite level starter, I think he's going to be a guy that you can count on to go in, take care of business, and win games, to me at least.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think it's kind of unfair just because you look at the numbers he did. We've talked about it plenty of times, just the touch he has on his throws, the accuracy he has with his throws. Some of those throws he makes those are elite big time NFL throws.
Right.
And it is unfair, to sit there and say, for me to sit there and say that I just don't think he did enough to continue to move up those draft boards. But I mean, I guess it just wasn't one of those wow type of workouts.
Well,
I mean, it was the definition of Kyle Trask. He comes in and he does what you expect him to do. He doesn't make a big scene. He doesn't, I mean, it's the definition of Kyle Trask. And again, I think he's going to be a great player in the NFL. I don't know if that's going to be the starting letter. Right. And I don't know, I guess if that was the negative side, there just wasn't really a lot of negatives that came out of pro day. So I guess I'm being a little nitpicky, but if I had to think of one, that would be it.
Okay. Well, Blake, let's take a quick break and we'll come back. I know there's not a whole lot going on right now in terms of recruiting, but I want to kind of set the stage for the next few months. Florida made an additional hire in its recruiting department. I want to get you to talk about that, but let's take a quick break and we'll be back right on the other side. Welcome back to the Swamp247 Podcast. I'm Thomas Goldkamp here with Blake Alderman. Blake, I wanted to get into recruiting a little bit just because that's kind of the lifeblood of Swamp247.com. That's what all of our hardcore subscribers and fans want to hear about. And we haven't talked about it a whole lot lately, obviously, because not much has gone on with, a year-long dead period. But that does look like it's going to end coming up in June. I know Florida's already scheduling some official visits. We'll get to some of their strategy in terms of all that. But first, I wanted to talk about the new hire that Florida made. They hired Corey Bell, I believe, as Assistant Director of Player Personnel.
Correct.
And he's a guy that was at Florida for a year in 2017. I guess, Blake, some Florida fans may be familiar with him, but many may not. What does he kind of bring to the table, and what is that role going to ask of him?
He's got a lot of experience coaching around the state of Florida, at the high school level. It's a funny story. He was actually committed to Florida coming out of high school himself. They were going on probation that year or facing probation at the time. And he, changed his mind and decided to go to South Carolina. So, it's kind of full circle. He was a cornerbacks coach previously at Florida under Jim McElwain. Whenever that staff was, pushed apart. He ended up at UCF with Randy Shannon. So Corey is the kind of guy that he has a lot of ties to the South Florida area. He was a big part in that defensive back class. I think it was the 2017 class where Florida landed, CJ Henderson, Brian Edwards, Marco Wilson, Sean Davis, some other guys, it was a really big, Brad Stewart was another one there. So, he was a big part in those kind of guys down there, maybe not all from South Florida, but a majority of those guys came from the South Florida area. So, South Florida is loaded in the 2022 class. It's loaded in the 2023 class. It's an area that Florida has continued to try to get their feet in. You've got a guy like John Herron, who's currently on Florida's in the recruiting staff as another assistant director of player personnel, who also has a lot of South Florida ties. So, it's another guy there, Tim Brewster, who's on staff at Florida, has a ton of South Florida ties, who also is recruiting Miami-Dade County for Florida. So, you just continue to get some of those guys that know a lot of players, know a lot of people, coaches, 7-on-7 coaches, just have so many ties down there. And it just adds another guy to Florida staff where you want to continue to get that, talent rich area. I think that whenever you've continued to get, whenever you're going to continue to focus on that, I think just having another face there really helps. So, he's limited in things that he can do. Obviously, he can't hit the road. He can't go on in-home visits whenever those happen, but he can still be in touch with some of these guys. He can still, use his contacts to, get film, on a guy earlier on. So, the thing with Florida is that you want to start to get out there and you want to offer earlier. If you have a coach that's passing along his film to, hey, Corey Bell, we've got a guy that's going to be a stud. Here's his film. You pass it on to coach and you kind of, press for that. Getting out there in front early, can really kind of open up more doors there, and if you start landing some of these teammates on teams, just having more of a pipeline there can continue to, get Florida's foot more and more in the door in South Florida. So, he's coached at Miami. He's coached at Florida, FAU, UCF was his last stop. And I believe he was at USF as well. So he's got a lot of experience, coaching around the state of Florida. I don't know that he's ever coached anywhere else at the college level without looking, off the top of my head. So, he's a guy that's always been around the state of Florida. He's already working hard, already been in touch with guys like Earl Little Jr., who's a top 100 cornerback down there in South Florida at American Heritage, which is a school that churns out tons of talent. So I'm interested to see how they continue because, whenever you see these types of hires, it just shows that Dan Mullen is continuing to put priority on South Florida. And this is the cycle to do it, because 2022 has plenty of pass rushers, plenty of defensive backs. So it's a pivotal year down there for sure.
Yeah, the thing I recall most about Bell from his 1 year, and again, that's not a huge sample size or anything, But I remember thinking he was very good at developing relationships with prospects. It was kind of that guy that, no matter what, it seemed like every recruit was kind of mentioning him when you asked about, what coaches they're talking to on
Sure.
staff.
I mean, there was guys that were committed to Florida, Tyreek Stevenson, obviously ended up at Georgia. Frank Latson, who was a big time wide receiver who was committed to Florida, ended up at Clemson. So, those were some guys that he was really pivotal in landing, along with John Heron, who was on the staff there too. So, if he can get those kind of guys early on and commit to Florida and continue that, because obviously when he left and was gone, those guys decommitted and went their own, separate ways. So those are the kind of guys that you want to get on the board early. And I think that that's what Bell can help with.
Yeah, I think it's a good addition for Florida. I think, again, like you said, you continue to add those pieces. It really helps. And, Florida needs an uptick in recruiting. They need to be able to keep a couple more of those top players from the state in the state of Florida at UF. And that's not a Florida specific issue. That's something that Florida State and Miami have also struggled with in recent years. And in this era of college football where you have the Alabama and the Clemson and Ohio State superpowers, even Georgia's doing it too to some extent. They're able to come in and raid. I think, like you said, it really comes down to the relationships and the building those relationships early on so that you have a constant presence. We were talking a little bit earlier today with one of our old colleagues, Luke Stampini, and he said he thinks, that's kind of the perfect role for Corey Bell, to be in that recruiting office and be developing those relationships, kind of just keeping in contact with guys. I think sometimes that's an area where Florida staff has maybe come up a little short, that they're not quite as much in the ear of these prospects all the time like some of these other programs are. And I think when you add guys that are really passionate about recruiting, that love the state of Florida, that, like to, kind of express their roots in South Florida, I think you have guys, like Corey Bell that can kind of keep those connections a little bit stronger.
Absolutely. And that's just like I said, 2022 class is a big time area for South Florida. 2023 is just as loaded. So, I mean, you want to continue to get in on, those underclassmen guys. And I think that Bell can be a help there.
All right, Blake, let's talk a little bit about what the recruiting calendar is going to look like going forward. I know there's not anything really immediate that's happening right now, but Florida is obviously planning on, once things open up, whenever, assuming that doesn't get pushed back again. What is kind of the outlook for Florida in terms of how that's all going to play out with camps and official visits and all that?
I'm not totally sure on camps yet. As far as I know, Friday Night Lights, which is usually the last Friday in the month of July, is still on. I don't know about June camps. They do a lineman camp, two lineman camps, 2 7-on-7 camps. They obviously have different day camps. I'm not quite sure what those are going to be yet. I haven't heard any information on that, if they will or won't have them. I'm a little skeptic myself whenever you just see that those, how those official visits are laying out there, and that's kind of hard to control what goes on in those types of settings. So, official visits, it's being reported that, that the end of May, which is when the dead period was set to expire anyways, is the month of June will be open for, which they'll call a quiet period, which, dead period means no contact whatsoever, whether it's, going to stop by a prospect's high school, whether that's coming to their school, et cetera. I mean, no contact. A quiet period means that you can't go, in a spring contact period, you could go by a school and you could, watch spring practice, or, you can't have a lot of conversations, you can kind of wave, hey, and that's about it.
Yeah.
But a quiet period, prospects can come to you, whether that's an unofficial visit, official visit, which will be good because, it's been a little over a year now since prospects could get on campus there. So Florida's coming out the gate hot. If that sticks with that dead period ending, June 4th weekend is already setting out to be a big visit weekend for Florida. We're still a little bit of a ways out. So far, I have 16 guys on that official visit list, which is, an impressive visit list. We're still a little bit of a ways out. I think some of those visits could be counted as tentative, just because there's still time to move things around, whether that's, a guy coming back later on in the season to catch a game. I think some of those guys, one guy, 5-star Jacoby Matthews, who's a safety down there and out there in Louisiana, he's been pretty set on deciding in December. So I think that, him wanting to decide later, I don't know that it's a smart move to use that official visit in June. So I think that that's one that I wouldn't be surprised if it's moved back till later on. But as of right now, that's what he's saying. So Florida's going to have a big weekend there. So I think that it's going to be good because recruiting is very much a perception thing. Right. You want to have big hype. And I think having all these guys together is a chance for all of them to bond. Florida's quarterback commit, Nick Evers, who's always kind of your bell cow of your class. You want those guys in the ear. You want them to get on board early so they can start recruiting guys. So he'll be there on campus to help along with the coaches, and recruiting staffers and all those there. So having a big weekend like that, I think, is going to continue to bring a lot of hype. You want to have hype in those weekends. You want to have guys roll out the red carpet. which I think there's some trick to it because you have so many guys on campus. Can you have a staff that can, cater to all these guys? And I think that Florida has enough between their coaching staff, their recruiting staff, all these other that's that I think they have enough to where they can make all these guys feel wanted. It's been so long since kids have been on visits that I think being on a visit in general is going to have these kids on cloud nine. You have all these player hosts that can be there kind of showing them around. And a lot of these guys have done virtual visits. Now you get to come back and you get to see things in person. So I think there's going to be a lot of excitement there. I think it's smart because a lot of these guys that are expected in that weekend, even other weekends, whether it's the June 11th weekend, June 18th, June 25th, I mean, they're going to have some guys on campus, maybe not as much as the June 4th weekend, but you're going to have all these guys around each other too. You're going to have them there hanging out, other visitors hanging out with other visitors. And I think that kind of camaraderie is what can, help mesh some of these guys together. And a lot of these guys are going to want to make their decisions, whether it's, July, August before their senior season. So I think it's smart for Florida to use those visits in the summer. Some of those guys that are looking to make later decisions, I think you could kind of urge some of those guys to come back later on. Come back in the fall, let's catch a game. You're making a decision later anyways. You can catch the swamp when it's rock. I mean, there's so many things you can say to some of these guys. So, but for the most part, a lot of these guys that are expected in the summer are going to make summertime decisions or, right there before their senior season.
So it sounds like Florida's kind of going for the initial impression approach. As soon as things get open back up, Florida's the first school that these guys see, and hopefully that excitement can build some buzz and really start to get the ball rolling.
And I think it's them trying to say, we want you really badly. We want you on campus the first chance we can get you there. And I think that's the kind of the shock and awe they're going for.
Do you worry at all about that happening and being successful, and then all of a sudden, you can't use official visits? I know that a lot of guys in state can get up here unofficially, but do you worry that, as these guys start to take official visits, I mean, NFL teams are talking about full stadiums. I would expect that college, if not full, they're going to be significantly increased capacity compared to what we saw last year. Do you worry that you might take away an opportunity to, get recruits in there for a big game, potentially on their official visit?
Yeah, and I think so. I think that's where it comes in for guys like Walter Nolan, the 5-star defensive tackle, who at this point hasn't come out with a solid timeline for a decision. Could that be sometime in the fall or later to National Signing Day, or the early signing day? That's a possibility. So I think a guy like him, I think a guy like Jacoby Matthews, who I mentioned earlier, wanting those later decisions. Chris McClellan is another guy out there in Oklahoma. And White, I think, is one that is talking about later towards the end of the season. So, that's one that I think that could be later in the season, could be right there before his season starts. So either way, I think that if you have a guy that's going to make a decision in August, right before their senior year starts, or sometime in July or something like that, it really doesn't matter because they're going to have a decision in the books anyway. So it's always harder to flip a guy, in my opinion, than it is to land them outright. If you've got a guy committed, it's easier to hold on to them. You've got, we've been here from the jump with you. You've got so many things you can use in their ear. So if a guy is planning to make his decision anyways, I say use the official visit now. Get it there whenever you've got a bunch of hype. You've got a bunch of guys there on campus with him to help, kind of set that and blow the water out of the visit. If you've got a guy that's going to make a decision, I think that you should absolutely use it in the summer.
All right, Blake, before we go, can you give us kind of your overall look at the 2022 class? I know that Florida has landed its quarterback in Nick Evers, but right now sitting on 5 commitments, ranked 23rd nationally. When should Florida fans expect to see some movement, and what are you looking for to start to feel pretty positive about this class going forward?
Well, I always say that you look at your solid nucleus of your class right there before the season starts, because you've got guys that make their decisions, after some official visits in the summer. You've got some guys that, make it before. Majority of the guys, it seems like the new kind of wave is that you want to make it before your senior season to get all the stress out of the ear so you can focus on football, focus on class and all this, that, and the others. So I think that that's whenever you really kind of take a look. And that's where you have your nucleus of your class. That's where you look at, this is the class we're going to roll with into the fall. We're going to continue to kind of hammer out some of these official visits. We'll hit the road. We'll scout some of these guys, continue watching senior film. New offers can go out, all those kind of things. But I think where you look at the class now, Florida's got their quarterback in Nick Evers, who I think is a really good player. I think he's really accurate with the football. I think that last year was his first year starting, at the varsity level. So he still has some room to grow. Whenever you watch his film, he's got some Pat Mahomes-esque type throws where he's, he kind of throws pretty well on the run. He does different things. I would like to see him sit in the pocket a little bit more. I'd like to see him get more comfortable there. I think that's where he can improve. Florida's got a guy in Tony Livingston, a 4-star offensive tackle, who played a jumbo wide receiver type role. I mean, this was a guy that, last year, early on in that 2022 cycle, he was listed as a tight end. Really athletic player. How does that translate to an offensive lineman? I'm really interested to see him. I think if I had to pick one guy, in spring football that I'm more interested to see than anybody else, it's Tony Livingston. I want to see him work out as an offensive lineman. I want to see how he moves and all those things because he's so athletic. And I mean, when you watch him play basketball, this isn't just a big guy who can dunk. I mean, this is a big guy that can move. So I think he's very interesting as an offensive lineman because if you've got a guy that athletic and where I've, sat here on this podcast plenty of times, say Florida needs to do a better job of recruiting offensive tackles.
Right,
sure, they've recruited really well at, the interior part of the line, centers, guards. Offensive tackle is one where they need to go. And I think Livingston is a guy that if he can continue to improve, better years are definitely ahead of him. So, you've got Francois Knowlton, who I think is, let me pull up 6'4", 225 pounds. Strong side defensive end. He needs to continue to beef up. But whenever I watched him at the Under Armour camp in Miami, he bends really well. He moves really well. So if you continue to get some meat on those bones, I think he's going to be a player that, if he continue to move like that, he's going to be interesting. And another interesting guy in Florida's class is CJ Hawkins, the 3-star tight end out of Tampa Berkeley Prep. He played last year, I believe, was his first year of football. And he was, if you look at his film, he has some pretty impressive catches. You've seen some 7-on-7 clips of him. He has some pretty impressive catches, but he's really powerful at blocking. And I think you can see that he's not quite sure what he's doing there. He's coming from playing basketball mostly, and last year was his first year of football. So I think he's a guy that has a lot of upside. I think he moves really well. I think he's another athletic guy that if Tim Brewster can get his hands on him, I think that, the sky is the limit there. So Florida's going to continue to have to build their class around these guys. I think whenever you start seeing the official visits in June, because right now, I mean, recruiting is pretty dead right now, man.
Right.
That's just where we're at right now, where I think guys were starting to set up decisions. And then you hear the report of, the dead period's coming to an end and June's going to be open up. A perfect example was, a guy like, what's his name? He was a wide receiver out of Tennessee. He was looking to make a decision. Oh man, this is going to bother me. Sorry, I'm scrolling away now.
I'm no help on that. I don't follow recruiting.
Yeah, as Isaiah Horton, I knew the name was blanking me. I had it on the tip of my tongue. He was a guy that was talking about making a decision early April, late March. Well, then the report of the dead period opening up came out. So now he's going to take a couple official visits. So sure. I think that at this point you've heard, these guys have waited so long to take visits. Some guys have done self-guided tours. Some guys, have not even taken visits at all, just because if you didn't take a visit last March before that, you didn't get to get on the road at all. So I think now these guys are waiting on official visits. So I think that that's why things are so slow right now. Sure, you could have a guy that, changes his mind, moves his timeline up, and obviously we'll cover that when that happens. But I think now with the official visits looking like a June, guys are going to take those. So I think that after those, you could see guys, talk about a timeline. A guy like Terrence Gibbs, the 4-star running back out of Winter Park High School there in Central Florida. He's planning on taking all 5 of his official visits in June and making a decision right after that, whether that's late June, early July, something like that. So I think that's when we'll start to see things pick up. Guys are going to take their official visits. They're going to make decisions. They're going to, whether it's sometime in the summer in July or right there early August before their senior season starts. So I think that that's when you'll start to see things pick up.
So what I'm hearing is you need to take a vacation in May and clear your schedule for June, July, August.
Pretty much. July is pretty much going to have a big X on my calendar there for any time to take off there. So I'm already expecting that one. All
right, man. Well, we appreciate the updates on Florida recruiting. Definitely will be fun to watch as it starts to heat up over the next, we got to get through the dead period first. But it sounds like right around the corner from kind of getting back to a little bit of a sense of normalcy. So that'll do it for today's episode of the podcast, guys. We appreciate you tuning in. If you're listening on one of the audio places that we put the podcast out, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, be sure to leave us a positive review. If you want to watch us and see our ugly mugs on YouTube, be sure to head to the YouTube channel and make sure you like and subscribe on the video. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.